Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the bin that you see out here on the bench has actually been out here since yesterday. Because I came down here with the intention of feeding this bin yesterday. I had a tray of food set up for them very similar to this, and it was already brought down here to the wormery, and then I realized that there was something else that I wanted to do more. So I kind of unplugged from doing this bin. I just left it here on the bench thinking, well, maybe we'll do it today, the next day. And here we are the next day, picking up where we left off on feeding these worms. I guess the other interesting thing was that I noticed how they've been in this container. These are the mixed red worms that were moved into this container 112 days ago because they had outgrown the smaller size container that they originally got moved into when we launched the bin 224 days ago. So it did seem to me like an interesting day today to check in on them on the day that they've now been in service for 224 days, half of the time in the previous container, and now the second half of the amount of time, another 112 days here in this somewhat larger container. So I'm going to slip on a glove, and we're going to go ahead and feed these little guys. Stuff that you see out here is a little bit of Diatomaceous Earth that we've been using to treat the springtails that live in this container. I don't worry too much usually about helper insects in my systems like springtails or whatever, but in this case it just seems like we got more than we need. So what I did last time and what we're going to do again today is simply sprinkle any springtails that we encounter along the way, and I'll be curious to see if that has helped any. Somehow I doubt it, and I guess I can already see that it hasn't done a whole lot, because the first thing I see as soon as I remove the plastic covering is springtails everywhere. All these little tiny white dots, all the little white specks out here on these coffee filters, all springtails. I can see a number of worms on the plastic I just removed, so I'm going to fold that thing in half, try to keep it nice and moist. Would hate to see that everything on that plastic dried out over the time period that we're working in here and then have a bunch of uncomfortable worms over there. So I don't know, I mean, what I did last time too was I simply, figured I would give any springtails I spot a little treatment of this stuff, but seems almost like a futile effort. Why bother? But still, I'm gonna follow through with the game plan. I'm really not convinced that this is a method that's going to have any impact whatsoever on the springtail population in here. So it kind of makes you wonder, why am I bothering? I don't know. Whatever. I'm kind of happy to see that the springtails haven't really, started blooming in any other container other than this one, although I have seen more in a couple other containers than I normally see. Kind of hoping that we can kind of contain the springtail expansion here before it spreads into other systems. Look at this. Holy cow. Here I do feel like I want to provide them with a little extra hit. I don't know. Like I said, it seems kind of futile. Tricky thing about this stuff is that if it's permitted to get wet, then it no longer functions the way it does, because it's kind of a mechanical pesticide. It actually gets in between the body parts of the target insect and then and does them in that way rather than being poisonous to them. So it's completely organic and it has no effect on the worms. But it does seem like no matter where I look, as soon as we peel back just a little bit of material, we're revealing loads and loads of springtails in here. And it seems highly unlikely that what we're doing here is actually going to tackle enough of them to put a dent in their numbers in here. Oops, look at them all. Holy moly, so many. I wish I knew what to do about these little guys. I suppose one option would be to just let things in here dry drastically. I'm starting to feel like I'm going to stop right there because, like I've said numerous times already, it seems pretty unlikely that what we're doing with that stuff is having any sort of an impact on the springtails. But yeah, there's just way more in here than I've seen anywhere else ever in any of my bins, or in anyone else's bins, and for that matter on any other worm channel videos. So yeah, I don't know, I'm just not digging it. So speaking of digging, why don't we explore a little bit? This system, when I moved them in here 112 days ago originally and positioned the contents of the previous container that they lived in here, I put it all in and then I nudged it aside, and then I rebuilt the opposite end of the bin with all fresh materials. And the worms on their own accord made their way over into that stuff. But the other thing I've kind of noticed is that they've really been reluctant, I don't know if reluctant is the right word, but they've not been highly motivated, I guess, to exit the old material that they came over with all those weeks and months ago. I figure, 112 days, that's months that this edge of the bin has not been the target of any feedings or the application of any bedding whatsoever. The only thing going on this side of the bin is pure castings. Here and there, when I come in to explore, I suppose I do slightly contaminate the contents of that side of the bin with a piece of bedding or something here and there once in a while, unintentionally. And it's not that important that we go fishing it all out, but to me it just seems unusual that the worms are still hanging out all the way on this far end of the bin when it's the opposite end of the bin that we've been providing fresh feedings to. So, I guess one thing we could do here, since we're going to come in here with more food, we can kind of try to take the material that's over on this edge of the bin and see if we can kind of stack it up a little bit higher, up to the very rim of the container, so that we could possibly leave ourselves a little bit more space on the opposite end to apply today's feeding, perhaps with a little bit of supplementary bedding. Man, there's just springtails throughout this stuff. So yeah, me treating the top surface with diatomaceous earth to knock out a small, tiny fraction of the springtails, if it's even doing anything, seems like a complete uphill battle. Totally unlikely to have any impact whatsoever on the overall springtail population in here. Seems like whatever I do in here to try to address that has been futile. I think I did try for one go around to leave the plastic coverings off this thing to see if perhaps a little bit of drying might reduce the, I don't know, the moisture levels to the point where maybe springtails wouldn't want to remain in here. Didn't seem to help too much. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what else could possibly work. I'm not sure if perhaps the BTI solution could potentially have some influence on impacting the numbers of springtails I'm seeing. The BTI is marketed under the name Mosquito Dunks. Most people recognize it as the Mosquito Dunks product that you see as a way to control mosquitoes in your pond or in any sort of standing water that you might have where mosquitoes are thought to possibly be breeding and becoming a problem. And I have found that the Mosquito Dunks work really well also to control things such as gnats and fruit flies. On those couple occasions when I've had problems here in my wormery with those types of insects, those insects I do not consider as welcome guests in my worm bins. Gnats and fruit flies, they're just pests. And luckily the luckily the BTI or Mosquito Dunks does seem to control them and knock them out. And I'm just wondering if perhaps if they were to get some of that in here too, then maybe we would start to see a little reduction. The BTI, normally I would just create this stuff the way it's normally meant to be created, which is in water. So I create a little bucket full of the BTI solution. I just fill up the bucket, drop in one of those little cakes, and then use that water. Just apply it to my worm bins so that that BTI bacteria can infiltrate the contents of the worm bin and, you know, stop the gnats and the fruit flies. So in that case, that is sort of a biological countermeasure, unlike the Diatomaceous Earth that we were sprinkling in here earlier, which has kind of a direct effect on the target. It's a little bit different with the BTI, which is really just the short abbreviation name for the bacteria that's in that stuff, and it's a bacteria that actually interferes with the development of the gnats and the fruit flies and the mosquitoes, obviously, from developing beyond the larval stage. So like any adults that are hanging out will be able to mate, they'll be able to drop their eggs, and those eggs will hatch and you'll have the larva of the insect. However, that larva will just never be able to develop beyond that larval stage into the mature flying insect. So that's the way that stuff works. And what I've been doing is I've been taking some of that mosquito dunks and dropping it into the blender when I'm making my worm chow. This right here is my worm chow, and it just consists of whatever I've got laying around at the time. This particular batch has some noodles, old noodles that were laying around that I threw in the blender to grind them up. I had a bunch of have a bunch of pumpkin seed in there. I usually throw some bird seed in there as well. And the recipe for that is always changing, just depending on what sort of stuff I've got laying around, what sort of stuff I'd like to try to do away with. So I have been trying to maintain some way of having BTI going into my bins on a semi-regular basis. And I guess what did happen in here last time was we put the food in. I think last time we put some cabbage leaves in here, or it might have been something else, because I am seeing some leftovers of something right here, whatever that is, piece of vegetable matter. I figured after 12 days since the last feeding we probably wouldn't see a whole lot of leftovers, so that kind of caught me off guard there. These are just pieces of newspaper. Sticks, I sometimes just extract them when I'm running into them. And I also feel like I might be seeing a little bit of perhaps some leftover coffee from the last feeding. You can see a lot of worms just hanging out throughout this stuff, enjoying what still remains of their last feeding in here. So I did put the coffee in like we usually do, and the coffee got sprinkled with some of that worm chow, and as a result, hopefully a little bit of the BTI bacteria was released from the ground up mosquito dunks that I placed in there. Maybe one way to possibly apply that in here in a more effective way would be to spread it out across the entire top surface, across the top here. The worms can come up and eat the worm chow, and the bacteria from the mosquito dunks can hopefully infiltrate the underlying worm bin bedding, possibly having some impact on those insects. So like I said, the mosquito dunks are obviously geared for mosquitoes, and I have had success with the stuff against gnats and fruit flies. However, I'm not too sure if springtails are on the list of, insects that this stuff has any effect on, but who knows? Might be just another little twist on trying things differently to see if they have any sort of a positive effect. I guess positive from my point of view, hopefully negative from the point of view of the springtails. So I took some of those leftover bits of bedding chunks that I encountered along the way, those larger pieces of newspaper I saw. Here's a little bit more of it, and figured I would plop it in here as possibly the foundational bedding for today's feeding. so that we can come in here with what I've got for them. It's just a variety of different things that went into a recent batch of soup. So you're going to see some parsley here, some peels off of some carrots. All this stuff's been frozen, and as it thaws it should become nice and mushy and yummy so that the worms can dig into it. I see some celery, I see some cauliflower. Here too we've got like the stem end, I believe, of a piece of cauliflower. So, oh, here we got a pretty large chunk of celery, which is got a little bit of something on it. Didn't look too good, so put it aside to be worm food. And then I guess kind of like I did last time, we could maybe even throw in a couple more of these coffee filters as supplemental bedding, or why don't we do what we did last time? We'll cover up with them as sort of a top covering and feeding zone indicator at the same time. Here I've got a napkin, somewhat soiled, somewhat torn up. More pretty good supplemental bedding to include down here in the feeding zone. And I think onto that we can place the remainder of this vegetable matter before we sprinkle in the coffee. Let me also just see if I can grab whatever stuck to the plastic container here. So now I do have those other coffee filters over there on the side. I'm wondering if we even need them. We've got this one here. Yeah, I'll just set those aside, possibly use them elsewhere if needed. Here I think we'll be fine with just one. So now let's give that strategy a try that I made mention of earlier, which was to do something I normally do anyway, which is to try to add the worm chow to the coffee, because I sort of have this little bit of a superstition about how the coffee seems to sit around in my bins. Whether that's an accurate observation or not, I'm not sure, but to me it just seems like by sprinkling some worm chow into the coffee, it just heightens the appeal of it a little bit, and hopefully attracts more worm traffic to it so that it gets eaten up rather than just bypassed by the wormies. And I figured some of these larger chunks of bedding bits that we unearthed, try to get them right back down over into the feeding area as well. So I've not been terribly generous on applying bedding today. I kind of thought I might, but then I also started to notice as we were nudging things over how close to the limit of this container we were. So I figured, why don't I hold off on adding more material to this bin today and just see if we can reuse what exists in here already. So as a result of that, since we started out with the idea of nudging things over to make room for more stuff, and since we didn't add more stuff, we've got a somewhat slanted arrangement of stuff in here now. Before I put in this feeding zone indicator, why don't we just go with a little bit more of this worm chow, which at this point is also intended to deliver BTI to the entirety of the container. So a little deviation from what we've been doing lately, which has been to not feed all the way on that far end of the bin where the finished castings are, and actually place some worm chow out there so that hopefully it delivers a little bit of the BTI mosquito dunks to that side of the bin, possibly helping with the reduction of the springtails a little bit. There again, if it only affects the development of insect larvae, getting beyond the larval stage into an adult creature, then it's an effect that might only be realized later in the game, when possibly the next generation of the insect fails to develop beyond the larval stage. So I don't know what the overall life cycle time frame of springtails is and what to expect and when, but at this point I feel like I'm kind of taking shots in the dark and hoping for the best. So I know a lot of people have been commenting about, oh, what's with the springtail hate? And I'm not going to say that I hate springtails. Got nothing against them personally, but anything that seems to, you know, tip out of balance and become more than the norm just seems to me like it's, you know, got to be addressed. We want to keep things in balance here. So I think we're done here. I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up, put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.